Action's always been part of what makes movies exciting. From the crazy stunts of the silent era to today's massive blockbusters, it's a genre that keeps finding new ways to thrill us. The silent era showed how far people would go just to capture danger on film. Samurai movies turned violence into something almost poetic, and Hong Kong filmmakers showed that action could be stylish, sharp, and full of rhythm. Then The Matrix and John Wick changed everything. They made action sharper, cleaner, and more cinematic than ever before. This video is about that evolution, how action became more than just explosions and chases, and how it keeps pushing what cinema can do. Before CGI, green screens, or fancy rigs, filmmakers had only one way to show danger: by actually doing the stunt for real. The silent era wasn't just about slapstick comedy and exaggerated expressions. It was about real danger. Every crash and every chase had to be captured for real, and that gave those films an energy modern action still tries to recreate. Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd might be remembered as comedy legends, but in many ways they were the first action stars. Chaplin's chaotic chases with the Keystone Cops turned everyday chaos into thrilling spectacle. The way he used camera speed, timing, and crowds made his slapstick feel alive. Harold Lloyd, on the other hand, took that chaos to new heights. In the film Safety Last, he hangs from a giant clock high above the city. Even though he used hidden safety gear and clever camera tricks, it still feels real. Audiences at the time were stunned. No one had ever seen anything like it, and for them, it truly felt like he was risking his life. Then there was Buster Keaton, the most fearless of them all. In Steamboat Bill Jr., he stood perfectly still as a full building facade collapsed around him, missing him by inches because of a precisely measured window opening. No stunt double, no trick shot, just pure trust in math and courage. Keaton didn't just act in his stunts, he engineered them. He used movement to tell the story, letting his actions show fear, frustration, or determination without saying a word. Other films like The General and The Mark of Zorro showed that action didn't need dialogue to be thrilling. The General used real trains and real crashes. Keaton famously staged a real train crash for one shot, sending an actual steam engine off a collapsing bridge, just to make the scene feel completely real. The Mark of Zorro introduced American audiences to the thrill of sword fights and masked heroism, blending romance, rebellion, and adventure in a way that inspired heroes like the Batman. What made these films so powerful was how simple they were. Everything you saw actually happened right there on camera. No digital tricks, no special effects, just raw creativity, guts, and perfect timing. Actors put their lives on the line just to make the audience feel rush. Stunt teams and pioneering cameramen found creative ways to shoot chases, crashes, and fights, and each new trick expanded what directors could show on screen. In a way, these filmmakers built the roots of modern action. They proved that movement alone, like a fall, a chase, or crash, could tell a story without a single line of dialogue. And even after 100 years, the spirit of those stunts still lives on in every car chase, explosion, and impossible jump we see today. By the mid-20th century, action cinema was evolving fast. It started to shift from tight urban chases to the vast deserts of the American West and the ancient battlefields of Japan. In Hollywood, John Ford's Stagecoach didn't just revive the Western, it completely redefined it. Before Ford, Westerns were mostly cheap, formulaic adventures. Stagecoach changed that. It followed a mismatched group of travelers crossing dangerous territory. It perfectly blended tense gunfights, daring wagon chases, and sharp character drama. The film earned 7 Oscar nominations, and turned both Ford and John Wayne into legends. But what really set it apart was Ford's use of the landscape. The wide, empty deserts of Monument Valley weren't just backgrounds, they felt alive. Every canyon and cliff became part of the tension, amplifying the danger and beauty of the West. Stagecoach proved that a Western could be more than simple entertainment. It could be poetic and tense. Ford showed that action doesn't need to be constant to be exciting. It just needs purpose. In Stagecoach, every chase and every gunshot felt earned. Meanwhile in Japan, Akira Kurosawa was reshaping action cinema in his own way. His masterpiece Seven Samurai didn't just tell a story about honour and survival, it changed how battles were filmed. Kurosawa trained hundreds of extras to move like real villagers and warriors. He filmed the battles using multiple cameras and deep focus, making every fight feel unpredictable and alive. You could see attackers, defenders, and death itself unfolding across the frame at once. His use of slow motion during key strikes gave the violence emotional weight. Every fall felt tragic, not glamorous. Critics everywhere hailed Seven Samurai as a turning point, and its influence spread globally, inspiring everything from The Magnificent Seven to A Bug's Life. Together, Ford and Kurosawa showed that action could tell stories. Their fight scenes weren't just spectacle, they revealed character, emotion, and theme. Every gunshot and chase meant something. Later directors like Sergio Leone took this idea even further with operatic tension, using long silences and sudden bursts of violence in films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. By the late 50s and early 60s, as Hollywood built bigger sets and technology got improved, action got even bigger. The 1959 version of Ben-Hur was a turning point for action movies. Its chariot race wasn't just a scene, it was a full-scale event. The production used thousands of extras, hundreds of horses, and the crew built an enormous arena from scratch. The actors, including Charlton Heston, actually rode those chariots at high speed, which gave the sequence a real sense of danger and weight. That race alone took months to film, but it paid off. It became one of the greatest action sequences ever made. Ben-Hur went on to win 11 Oscars, proving that real spectacle could move audiences as much as any story. Through the 1960s, Hollywood chased that same sense of spectacle. Films like Lawrence of Arabia and Cleopatra pushed action to new extremes. They featured deserts filled with armies, real explosions, and sweeping camera shots that made everything look larger than life. There were no computers or green screens, just huge sets, dangerous stunts, and filmmakers willing to go to impossible lengths to capture it all. Across the world, a completely different kind of action was taking shape. In Hong Kong, filmmakers were reimagining what action could look like. Studios like Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest were making martial arts films that didn't rely on big sets or massive budgets. Their focus was on rhythm, movement, and skill. Then Bruce Lee arrived and changed everything. His first major hit, The Big Boss, shocked audiences with its raw power and realistic fighting. Then came Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon, where his fights started to feel more emotional and precise. But Enter the Dragon was the real turning point. It was the first time a Hollywood studio teamed up with Hong Kong filmmakers, and it introduced Hong Kong action to the entire world. The fights were fast, raw, and beautifully simple. You could clearly see the focus in Lee's eyes, like he was completely in control of his body and the space around him. What made Bruce Lee special was how he treated martial arts as more than combat. His philosophy, Jeet Kune Do, was about adaptability, freedom, and expression. That mindset came through in his movies. He didn't follow a pattern. He moved the way the moment demanded. His speed was so fast that directors had to slow the footage down so audiences could even see what he was doing. His influence goes way beyond kung fu films. The kind of precision, rhythm, and realism he brought would shape everything from Hong Kong action in the 80s to how Hollywood choreographs fights even today. After Lee's death, Hong Kong cinema kept evolving. Jackie Chan picked up where Lee left off, but added his own touch. Instead of stoic punches, Chan's fights are playful and inventive. He turned everyday objects like ladders, tables, and even mop buckets into his weapons. His stunts looked fun, but were incredibly dangerous. In Police Story, he famously slid down a pole covered in light and actually burned his hands doing it. Movies like Drunken Master and Police Story showed him jumping off buses and crashing through glass. Audiences could see the risk, and that made it unforgettable. His style inspired filmmakers to blend humour with action. By the time The Matrix hit theatres in 1999, you could see just how much Hollywood had learned from Hong Kong cinema. Its fight scenes, wire work, and rhythm all came from Hong Kong action cinema. By the end of the 1970s, action cinema had two clear identities: Hollywood's huge explosive blockbusters and Hong Kong's fast, tightly choreographed martial arts films. One focused on scale, the other on movement, but both shared the same goal: to thrill audiences. From then on, the two worlds kept learning from each other, and together they kept redefining what action in cinema could be. The early 1980s were the era of muscle men and massive explosions. Action movies had gotten louder, tougher, and bigger than ever. Audiences wanted heroes who could survive anything. The Vietnam War had ended, America felt uncertain, and Hollywood gave people the exact opposite of weakness. Unstoppable men who could take down whole armies. Movies like Commando, Rambo First Blood, and Predator turned guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone into symbols of power. They didn't just fight villains, they fought entire armies. The stories were simple, sometimes even silly, but they worked because the action felt intense. People went to the theatre to see chaos on the biggest screen possible. But the 1980s weren't just about muscle. Raiders of the Lost Ark gave the action genre a different kind of hero, Indiana Jones. He wasn't unstoppable, he got hurt, panicked, and made mistakes. That made him interesting to watch. Spielberg's mix of adventure, humour, and danger made action feel alive again. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, George Miller's Mad Max the Road Warrior redefined what chaos could look like. Shot in the middle of the Australian desert, it felt raw, violent, but strangely beautiful. It wasn't a big-budget Hollywood film. It was shot in the Australian desert with a small crew and rough conditions. Nothing about it felt polished or staged. You could see the real dust in the air and the sweat on faces. It felt real and dangerous in a way most movies didn't at the time. The film looked like chaos, but it was chaos with rhythm. Every chase, every crash had a strange kind of precision. George Miller wasn't shooting action the way American directors did. He had worked in a hospital emergency room where everything was fast, chaotic, and unpredictable. That same energy made its way into his films. His action scenes felt alive and full of panic and momentum, like anything could go wrong at any second. Underneath all that madness, there was something emotional too. The movie's world felt broken. People fighting over gasoline and struggling just to survive. Max wasn't a superhero. He was just a man doing what he could to stay alive. That sense of desperation and exhaustion made it more than just a car chase movie. Mad Max 2 went on to inspire an entire generation of filmmakers. Its raw, kinetic energy reshaped how sci-fi and dystopian worlds were imagined. You could see its fingerprints on everything from The Terminator to the wave of post-apocalyptic films that came after it. But the same obsession with danger had a dark side. In 1982, during the production of Twilight Zone the movie, a helicopter crash killed actor Vic Morrow and 2 children during a night shoot. The crew had pushed too hard for a perfect shot, and it ended in disaster. It was a wake-up call for the entire industry. After that, Hollywood introduced stricter safety rules for stunt teams and set work, and filmmakers began thinking twice before risking lives for a shot. Still, the genre didn't slow down. In 1984, The Terminator hit theatres. It was dark, gritty, and made on a very low budget, but it didn't feel small. James Cameron used every trick he knew to make it look bigger than it was. Arnold Schwarzenegger's emotionless, unstoppable presence turned a simple story into something iconic. It was sci-fi, it was horror, but underneath it all, it was a chase movie about survival. It proved that a smart concept matters more than a big budget. Then came Die Hard in 1988, the film that reshaped modern action. Bruce Willis wasn't a bodybuilder or a war hero, he was just a cop in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked scared, he got hurt, but he never stopped. That vulnerability made Die Hard special. It turned action into something personal. It was less about brute strength, more about survival. The movie used its space perfectly. The Nakatomi Plaza wasn't just a location, it was a maze. The tension built scene by scene, and every hit McClane took made us root for him even more. Even decades later, people still consider it one of the greatest action movies ever made. The late 80s and early 90s kept pushing the mix of realism and spectacle. Lethal Weapon added emotion and humour to the buddy cop formula. Aliens turned sci-fi horror into military action. And then Terminator 2 pushed boundaries again. Not by abandoning practical effects, but by blending them with new CGI. The CGI was groundbreaking for its time, but it still felt physical because Cameron shot real stunts around the digital effects. With Terminator 2, James Cameron pushed cinema into the digital age. By this point, you could feel Mad Max's fingerprints all over Hollywood. That raw, unpredictable energy, where every moment felt one mistake away from disaster, had become the new blueprint for action movies. That's where speed came in. It didn't just copy what came before, it built on it. You could feel the chaos of Mad Max in the way everything felt on the edge of collapse, and the tension of Die Hard in how it trapped ordinary people inside an impossible situation. The setup was quite simple on paper, a bus rigged to explode if it dropped below 50 miles per hour, but the way it was executed made it something more than just a chase. It felt real and intense. Speed proved that the best action didn't need bigger explosions or louder guns. It needed stakes that you could feel. It carried the spirit of Mad Max and Die Hard, but it stood out as something entirely its own. By the mid-1990s, the classic action hero was changing. The muscle era was fading. Stallone and Schwarzenegger were getting older, and the indestructible hero was dying with them. Now you had actors like Keanu Reeves, Mel Gibson, and Tom Cruise. Their characters were less about brute strength and more about grit and desperation. Keanu Reeves didn't need to look like Rambo. His quiet determination said everything. Tom Cruise wasn't an indestructible soldier. He was just a man caught in impossible situations. The tone of action films shifted too. The stories became more personal, the stunts became more inventive, and the heroes became a little more human. They could bleed, panic, or screw up, and that vulnerability made them easier to root for. It wasn't about being untouchable anymore. It was about surviving. Looking back, that era hit a rare balance. The action was big but never empty. The stories were simple but never dumb. Whether it was a cop, a soldier, or a cyborg, the heroes always had something that made you root for them. A mix of confidence, vulnerability, and just enough madness to make you believe they'd survive the impossible. You could see the effort and the danger behind every scene. That's why even now, decades later, people still call it the golden age of action. By the late 1990s, action cinema was standing at the edge of something new. The era of muscle-bound heroes was long gone, and filmmakers were starting to explore ideas that once seemed impossible. The Matrix arrived right in the middle of that shift. It wasn't just another sci-fi movie with cool visuals. It was a complete reimagining of how action could look and feel. CGI had existed long before it, but never had it been used with this much precision. Before Matrix, CGI was used to save time and to create something alienating and otherworldly. But The Matrix showed that it can be used for creative purposes. The Matrix showed that filmmakers can achieve unlimited creative freedom with CGI, and it can be used as a storytelling tool, not just to save time and effort. The Wachowskis combined the grace of Hong Kong choreography with the power of digital freedom and made something unforgettable. The green-tinted fight scenes, the slow-motion gunfights, and the impossible physics, they all felt unique to the audience at that time. The Wachowskis didn't use computer graphics as decoration. They used them to build a world where reality itself was the enemy. That unique idea, paired with its unique visual style, changed cinema forever. The film's bullet time sequence, where Neo bends backward as bullets ripple past, became the shot that changed action filmmaking forever. The technique had been tested before, but never at this level of ambition. The production team built an entire rig of still cameras to move through frozen time, giving the audience a perspective that felt impossible to achieve in real life. For the first time, CGI wasn't just about showing destruction, it was about controlling time, space, and perspective in ways no practical setup ever could. The film proved that digital effects, when used right, could expand a filmmaker's imagination rather than replace it. Suddenly, the limits of what could be filmed didn't matter anymore. If you could imagine it, then you could build it on screen. Then came the Bourne Identity in 2002, where The Matrix felt like a video game dream. Bourne was cold, grounded, and anxious. Paul Greengrass shot action like Panic. He uses close and handheld camera movements. The shaky cam and quick cut editing gave audiences the feeling of being inside the chaos. But while that worked beautifully for Bourne, it soon became a curse for the genre. Countless films tried to copy the technique. Directors started shaking the camera just to fake intensity. What once felt like realism turned into noise. Bourne's style was meant to make you feel paranoia, not confusion, but Hollywood missed the difference. While CGI and handheld chaos was taking over Hollywood, Mission Impossible was quietly writing its own legacy. Tom Cruise wasn't playing a hero anymore, he was becoming one. As the series continued, each film pushed him closer to madness. He performed a dangerous rock climbing scene in Mission Impossible 2, climbed the Burj Khalifa in Ghost Protocol, hung off the side of a plane in Rogue Nation, and performed a real halo jump from over 30,000 feet in Fallout. Tom Cruise trained for months just to make those few minutes on screen feel real. That realism became the soul of the series. The tension came from knowing that if he slipped, it wasn't just the character who'd fall. These crazy stunts weren't just marketing gimmicks. It was about restoring a kind of honesty to blockbuster filmmaking. In a decade ruled by computer-generated stunts, Mission Impossible reminded audiences that the most thrilling thing you can see on screen is something that really happened. While other directors were chasing realism or spectacle, Quentin Tarantino was making his own kind of action. His action had rhythm and style that the audience had been craving for a long time. Kill Bill was his love letter to every kung fu, samurai and grindhouse film he'd ever adored. The Crazy 88 fight is a perfect example. It's not about realism or clean choreography, it's all about rhythm and style. Tarantino's action worked because it had personality. His characters didn't fight like trained soldiers, they fought like people with stories, grudges and emotions boiling over. You could feel their anger and urge for revenge. When someone finally got what they deserved, the loud explosions and gunfire felt satisfying and earned. He didn't care about perfect choreography or realism, he just cared about tension, timing, and emotion. By the mid-2000s, the action genre started to shift. The chaos that once defined the screen began to feel more deliberate and more human. Filmmakers were no longer chasing scale for its own sake. They were chasing feelings. The world had grown familiar with explosions and spectacle. What it craved was tension that felt personal again. Christopher Nolan tapped into that shift perfectly. With the Dark Knight trilogy, he pushed realism to the edge of madness. He flipped a full-sized 18-wheeler truck in downtown Chicago, blew up an actual hospital, and crashed a real 747 for Tenet. Nolan's philosophy is simple. He believes in using practical effects and stunts as much as possible. He films real stunts and physical elements to create a sense of realism. When he does use digital effects, he uses them carefully, mainly to enhance what is already there, not to replace actual performances. For instance, he might use digital effects to enhance explosions or environmental details, but only in a way that supports the practical effects and stunts performed by actors. His films reminded people that practicality and realism could live comfortably alongside subtle CGI. Meanwhile, another kind of action was finding its audience. Fast and Furious began as a street racing film about stolen cars and loyalty, but over time it transformed into a full-blown spectacle of wild stunts and impossible physics. It was loud and absurd, but it captured a truth about modern action movies, that bigger scale often sells better. The franchise used a lot of CGI, but unlike The Matrix or Mission Impossible, it rarely used it to explore new ideas. It was just entertainment at its purest. For better or worse, Fast and Furious became the symbol of big-budget, high-octane cinema. Fast and Furious showed how the genre could lose its impact when flashy visuals took over from meaningful content. By the early 2000s, the genre began to split in two directions. Some filmmakers chose realism and focused on emotions and authenticity rather than spectacle, while others went in the opposite direction and started building bigger, flashier worlds with CGI, aiming for perfect visuals rather than real impact. The genre felt divided. And then the Raid Redemption landed like a punch to the gut. It stripped away the polish and brought back the raw immediacy of close quarters combat. The film didn't rely on big names or expensive effects. It relied on choreography so precise it felt real and almost hurt to watch. Every punch had rhythm. Every cut carried impact. It wasn't about saving the world or blowing up cities. It was about surviving one building. And somehow, that felt bigger than any superhero showdown. The Raid Redemption reminded everyone that action didn't need to be big. It just needed pain and exhaustion, the things that make us human. The years that followed the Raid Redemption brought a new kind of refinement to the chaos. Action cinema began to rediscover itself. It started to become less about the biggest explosion and more about precision and the feeling of being inside the moment. And no one embodied that better than John Wick. What started as a simple story about a man avenging his dog's death ended up redefining modern action. Wick's fights weren't about power, they were about control. Every reload, every headshot, every stumble felt rehearsed yet natural. The gun-fu choreography and the long takes made it almost hypnotic to watch. For once, violence wasn't chaos, it was art. That level of detail came from dedication. Reeves trained for months with real weapons and tactical experts, performing almost every stunt himself. Director Chad Stahelski filmed it like someone who understood what it actually feels like to take those hits. He didn't hide the movement behind shaky cameras or quick edits. He showed it clearly and confidently. John Wick proved that the audience didn't need confusing editing to feel danger. They just need honesty and style. That approach ended up reshaping Hollywood action, inspiring films like Atomic Blonde, Nobody, and Extraction. In 2015, George Miller came back with Mad Max: Fury Road. Even in his 70s, Miller insisted on doing it the hard way. He built hundreds of custom vehicles, staged explosions in the middle of the Namibian desert, and shot almost everything for real. The film's rhythm was unlike anything else. Every chase and every burst of violence kept the momentum going without ever losing focus. Instead of centering on Max, Miller put Furiosa at the heart of the story, a woman running from oppression, trying to carve out a future in a world built to crush her. It proved that action could still be massive and loud, but also personal and full of meaning. As Hollywood moved deeper into the age of blockbusters, the idea of action began to stretch. Big studios chased universes, sequels, and crossover events. The stakes went from saving a bus to saving reality itself. Studios figured out that chaos sells, even if it means nothing. So they started mass-producing formulaic action movies. Movies like Red Notice, The Grey Man, Fast X, or Black Adam throw everything at the screen. Drones, slow motion, endless CGI, but forget to make us care. It's all noise without rhythm and danger without weight. There's no tension when everything's invincible. Great action scenes used to build anticipation. Think of the glass barefoot crawl in Die Hard, or the truck chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You felt every hit because it looked painful and exhausting, not pretty. Nowadays, action feels like it's been generated, not lived. The genre became more about scale than emotion, and when everything looks the same, it stops meaning anything. At the same time, few filmmakers kept the old spirit alive. John Wick Chapter 4 was more than just the end of a franchise. It felt like a proper farewell, not just for the character, but for that whole style of clean, practical action. The movie didn't rush anything. The fights were long and patient. Chad Stahelski shot action with clean angles and wide shots, letting the movement play out clearly. The film didn't rely on the usual fast cuts or shaky camera work to cover mistakes or force intensity, which made every hit feel sharper and every moment land with more weight. Christopher McQuarrie's Mission Impossible films continued Nolan's legacy of real stunts done at an insane scale. Even in his 60s, Tom Cruise is still pushing the boundaries of practical stunts. In Fallout, he flies an actual helicopter between mountains. In Dead Reckoning, he jumped from a mountain with a bike, and in the final Reckoning, he hangs from a flying plane. By these stunts, you could tell that the team was trying to hold on to something genuine in an industry that keeps drifting towards green screens and CGI. Furiosa took a similar approach. George Miller didn't try to top Fury Road, he just focused on telling a character story with the same rough and physical style that he always loved. Even with more CGI than before, the movie still has that weight you only get when things are actually happening in front of a camera. The genre feels like it's in the middle of a shift. Studios will keep chasing bigger universes and louder sequels, but people aren't fooled by size anymore. People can tell when something's built with care and when it's just noise. The movies that stick with us are the ones that find something human inside all the chaos. That's why films like John Wick 4 and Furiosa hit so hard. These films are proof that action doesn't need to be bigger, it just needs emotion and honesty. Because what makes action memorable isn't how big it is, but how much it makes you feel.